good for you to do when you're ready to do it. I will recommend not procrastinating taking it to the last second just in case there's a technical issue, because that does happen every time. Every time someone waits to the last hour to take it, then there's an issue. Speaking of which, I never did go in and get rid of that time limit, so I'm going to do that right now, since we're waiting on a few people anyways. Okay, so there's no time limit. You can take however long you want. Congratulations. Well, you can't log out. Yeah. So once you log in, you have to take it then. You can't log back out and log back in again. It won't let you do that. So please don't do that. But if you need more than like an hour to take it, you have more than an hour to take it. Any other questions about how to do the final, when you do the final? Yep. You can just copy and paste it, yeah. I am going to be in here Tuesday and Wednesday this week at your usual class time. So if you need a quiet place to come and take it, you can. Of course, you're going to have to bring your own device to take it on, but you can do that if you'd prefer. That is up to you. Like I said, Tuesday and Thursday, well, Tuesday and Wednesday this week. Thursday, they have us doing meetings. So, yeah. Or if you just need a quiet place to work on other stuff, you can come in here. Now, as for today, it's really, really short. It's just our final chapter 25, and then we will do the review after that. For chapter 25, what it does is it breaks down different mediums and popular art styles at the moment, just to show you what's happening in the last decade and presently in art, since this is the final chapter that is art of the present. And we are starting off with painting. I am skipping the architectural section just because architecture has not changed too much. They're still doing the international style, just with some modifications to it. So mostly like skyscrapers, just with some additional modifications. Painting has changed a little bit. A popular trend right now in painting is neo-expressionism. Neo-expressionism is just new expressionism. We've talked about expressionism a few times. Does anyone remember some of the characteristics of expressionism? Don't think too hard, it's in the name. Yeah, it's just expressing yourself, either using facial expressions of subjects or using colors if we're talking about abstract expressionism. So it's just using art as a form of self-expression. Neo-expressionism is a continuation of that, just with a few tweaks. Neo-expressionist artists will often combine subject matter and colors to express themselves, versus abstract expressionists were just doing colors pretty much. And expressionists and German expressionism were worried about subject matter. This is the culmination of all of those thoughts on expressionism. And the artist we're going to look at for neo-expressionism is Anselm Kiefer with Osiris and Isis. Anselm Kiefer is another artist that we have a ton of examples of, particularly in Fort Worth at the Modern, which is really, really, really rare. Nobody has that. In fact, when Anselm Kiefer did a retrospective show a couple years ago, the Fort Worth Modern ended up donating several artworks to that, just because they have a bunch for whatever random reason that they do. I don't really know why they have so many. He is extremely popular right now. He is alive and working still. And Osiris and Isis is all about the Egyptian mythological story of Osiris and Isis. Does anyone know about them? We don't know too much about Egyptian mythology in the West, not as much as Greek. Do you remember anything, George?
The other thing I know about Osiris, like he has I don't know what it is, twin possible second
Yeah,
version.
yeah. So this is before that. This is the very, very beginning. Osiris and Isis are two of the main deities in Egypt mythology. They are brother and sister, but they are also husband and wife. And partway through this mythological story, Osiris's, I think it's his brother or his son, one or the other, kills him by ripping him to different pieces, rips him apart. And Isis mourns Osiris. And her mourning and her tears are able to eventually bring him back to life and put him back together again. So this actually is in one way or fashion or form, illustrating that story very abstractly, though you're not actually seeing the figures of Osiris and Isis, you're seeing representations of them. You'll notice in the main central focal point of this painting, a step pyramid, which is the early version of a pyramid in Egypt before the flat-sided pyramid. But more interesting with this one is all of the things that were used to make this painting. This is definitely a mixed media painting. So Kiefer used oil paints, acrylic paints, emulsion, and clay and porcelain. Those three things are from pottery. Lead, copper wire, and circuit board all over this. So this is highly heavily textured. In fact, with Anselm Kiefer paintings, they have a little barrier around it with a little trough underneath it because pieces flake off constantly. They're constantly just falling off of it because of the clay. You can kind of see the porcelain bits that are wired on. The clay is what he used to make up a good chunk of this pyramid texture. It really is like a crackly surface if you see this one in person. And you can, of course, make out the wires that are the stringy-like substances on this painting. So reasons for all of the materials used. So first off, oil and clay are needed to make a painting. Second off, the clay and porcelain, so they come from earth or dirt. Supposedly people are born of earth and dirt. So that represents Osiris's body. That broken bits of porcelain here are pieces of what are supposed to represent his body. And they are being connected back together with a copper wire and circuit board representing like our nervous system. So this is the part of the story in which Osiris is being put back together right before he is finally made into a person again. And like I said, all of that wire and the porcelain bits are pieces of his body all interconnecting together. So it is a bit more abstract in terms of like representing an actual story, but there is representational objects used to illustrate that story. Of course, there is a lot of darkness going on in this painting, but of course, it represents Isis's feelings when Osiris was ripped to pieces and she thought he died. So she would have been sad and angry and upset, which is why there's a lot of muted dark tones there. Questions about this one? So he, like I said, he has about 3 works at the Fort Worth Modern. One is very similar to this, but it's a sunflower. It's got to do with sunflowers, and in the center he has an actual, so if you've ever seen sunflowers, they get really tall, like 6 feet tall. He has an actual sunflower stalk of a dried sunflower, and it's huge on it, attached to the painting. And then he has another one that is a book on a pedestal with wings, entirely made of lead, that has to do with book burnings in World War II in Germany. The book has been given wings because the book was burned and sent into the afterlife, and it is made entirely of lead, a object that is supposed to be poisonous because Hitler said the books were poisonous. So yeah, pretty cool, deep thinking stuff with him. His more recent works are not quite as deep. He does spin-offs of like Starry Night, but instead of replicating Starry Night, he gets these thick canvas materials and builds them up and sticks diamonds inside of them. So literal Starry Night, a very expensive Starry Night, but not as deep in the thought process as his earlier works were. Another example of painting, we have a little bit of street art mixing in with high art here with Gaijin Fujita. We will be looking at some more examples of street art in a moment as well. It is an art style that is on the rise at the moment. Artists are figuring out very ingenious ways of allowing or getting galleries and museums to allow them to exhibit their art in a higher format than just graffiti. Fujita did begin his art career as a graffiti artist. His graffiti art was well accepted and well liked, so he ended up transitioning from painting on walls and billboards to painting on canvases and exhibiting it in galleries and museums, which is what Street Fight is. Street Fight combines traditional Japanese printmaking motifs with modern day graffiti art. So if you remember back to Japanese woodblock prints, they are very flat looking, heavy outlines, not too much detail. He used that here for the two figures that are in the middle of the street fight, the samurai and the man with the gun. And of course, in between them is that symbol fight. It also references this one video game, and I can never remember the name of it. Does anyone remember the name of that? It's like a really, really old video game. I think it's Street Fighter, yeah. Because if you play Street Fighter, it'll say like fight in the center of the screen. You have the two players that are bouncing up and down. Anyways, so it references that as well. Of course, you have cityscape in the background, making it a bit more modern, as well as the graffiti and the reference to the video game. You also have some graffiti, just signatures popping out in the background. Over here, the word street, because it is titled Street Fight, would be in your traditional calligraphy font of a Japanese print. And he has used gold leaf in the background as well. And this is also a triptych, so a painting in three parts. Here's part one, part two, part three. It's painted on three separate panels of canvas and then put together. So triptychs in gold leaf are representative of Renaissance art. Triptychs and diptychs popped up in popularity during the Renaissance period. Gold leaf was traditionally used for very expensive religious paintings. So he has also combined a little bit of Western art history in here as well. So we have references to old Japan, new Japan, and a little bit of Renaissance art too, all in this one painting. Thoughts on this one? Do you like it? Don't like it? I like this one. I think it's cool. Now let's see what's happening in photography. So photographers today are trying to come up with new and more innovative ideas on how to take a photo. So instead of just taking a picture of something that you see, you're trying to actually create composition. So if you remember way back to chapter 1, Robin Rohde's He Got Game, that is an example of an artist trying to innovate photography. So if you remember, Robin Rohde was on the ground laying down and the picture was up above. Vic Munoz is working in a very similar style to Robin Rohde. He gets really large piles of garbage and arranges them around something he has sketched on the ground to create really interesting compositions. And then he gets up on a cherry picker or a lift and takes the photograph looking down on the trash pile. The example of Vic Munoz's work that we're going to look at is Atlas, or Carlos is what it's supposed to be. But or Carlos. And then we'll look at Wally Rods in a second. I'll come back to this one for him. So here is Vic Muñoz Atlas, or Carlos. I don't know why this one, the book always says Carlos. So you can see he is sketched out on this ground area, Carlos himself, and then put a pile of real garbage, this is not painted, above Carlos. This is referencing a little bit of Greek mythology here, particularly Atlas. Does anyone remember what Atlas does? He holds up, well, technically the world on his shoulders because he did something to upset Zeus. He has to carry the world on his shoulders for eternity now as punishment. So Carlos here is functioning as modern day Atlas, but instead of a world, it is now garbage, as a little commentary on the world today as well. There's a little bit of commentary as well on like blue collar jobs primarily being taken by minority groups. Vic Muñoz does a lot of works about racial injustices and racial inequality in the United States, using things like garbage piles. You wouldn't think probably first glance that this is actually a photograph. You might think it's a painting just because of the format and composition that he used. But like I said, it is a photograph. What do you guys think of this one? Yeah, I like Vic Muñoz. He was really, really popular. Like it says there in like 2010s, really highly collected. So that TV show that used to be on Empire, have you guys ever seen that or heard of it? It was really popular in Chicago. I was living in Chicago then. So in the backgrounds of the sets, they had a bunch of Vic Muñoz all the time, like all the time. And it was around then that Vic Muñoz really shot to popularity in collectors' world. And here's Wally Rod, the Atlas group, but like I said, I'm going to go back. So Wally Rod is the actual person that took the photographs. The Atlas group just convinced Wally Rod to exhibit the photographs. So Rod actually survived the Lebanese Civil War, during which people were just randomly setting off bombs, car bombs, bombs inside of office buildings, apartment buildings. You never knew where one was going to go off. A bunch of people ended up dying. Rod witnessed that, and as the bombs were going off, he took pictures of it happening. The pictures are a bit tarnished because of what they had to go through to get to America. Rod did eventually end up migrating to the US. And it was then that the Atlas group saw Rod's photographs because they were buddies and convinced him to exhibit them because of the damage and discoloration of what they had to go through before they were exhibited. They do have a very haunting appearance to them, which kind of adds to the tonality of the fact that thousands of people ended up dying in the Lebanese Civil War, which could have been avoided entirely. You can see one of the bombs happening in the background here. This was an apartment building that it went off in. And this is Rod he's taking a picture out of his own apartment window. They're terrifying. This is part of a series, like I said, there's 15 in total. You can see the amount of damage that would have been done. These were taken in 2002. I know that camera technology was not as great then as it is now, but it still would have been a lot more legible than what it appears here. This is just due to all that damage. You can even see some of the pink fading of being exposed to things like water. That takes us into what's happening with sculpture today. A lot of sculptors today are using really easy, recognizable imagery to make their artworks. We've looked at Jeff Koons' balloon dogs before. It's an easy, recognizable image. They aren't doing super, super complicated things. Some contemporary artists are, but the really successful ones are just doing easy, digestible things. There's another artist, trying to think of his name. Really famous. I cannot think of his name. Anyways, he's a British artist and he gets skulls, like real human skulls, donated to him from like different science labs and stuff that didn't need them. And he will bedazzle them with, I shouldn't say bedazzle, he uses like diamonds and rubies, like real diamonds and rubies on them. So easy, recognizable imagery. You can tell it's a skull right away. People want to buy it. It's kitsch. We're going to look at Kiki Smith Iceman. This one was done in the 90s, so a bit old in comparison to like a Jeff Koons artwork. Does anyone remember Jeff Koons' Balloon Dogs, by the way, or do I need to pull up a picture? You want to pull up a picture? Okay. We have time for pictures today, so that's fine. So Jeff Koons does these really large balloon dog sculptures, like huge. He also does really small ones, but it's an easy to digest image. There's not much behind it other than people really recognize it and gravitate towards it. That's pretty much how contemporary sculpture is these days. And why can I not remember that daggone British sculptor's name? I'll remember it second hour probably, because that's usually when I remember things. Kiki Smith Iceman, like I said, is from the 90s, but it is something that if you were born in the 90s or watching news in the 90s, I was born in the 90s, but I don't remember this. But if you're watching news in the 90s, you would have recognized this Iceman. So back in the 90s, in Antarctica, archaeologists found a perfectly preserved Neanderthal, even frozen in the ice. And it was all over the news. And Kiki Smith just decided to make a bronze and silicone replica of that Neanderthal that was found in ice, like basically just a copy of him. And then she nailed it to the wall. So this would have been exhibited, nailed to the wall. And yeah, people back in 1995, when this was first exhibited, would have recognized that as, oh, that was the guy that was on the news. So easy to recognize things is mostly what contemporary sculpture is. Now let's see some really popular trends in art now, beginning with public art, and then we'll go into issue-oriented art, and then we'll see what's happening in the art world that's not the US. And that's the last thing we'll do today. So public art is art that's made for the public to enjoy or hopefully to appeal to the broader masses, such as Mylands, Vietnam Veterans War Memorial. We've looked at that one before, so we're not going to look at that one again. But that war memorial was done in remembrance of the Vietnam War. It is literally a gash in the earth. To represent the feelings of that war. And the black granite surface reflects your own image back to you. Another example of public art, though, that is a lot more common than war memorials is art like Walla Walla Campanile. So Walla Walla Campanile was made as part of the law of the 0.5% of a public building that uses federal tax dollars to build has to be set aside for an artwork. So a lot of the art that we have around campus, a lot of the art that UTVV has, because those schools are federally funded, if we build a new building, we have to set aside 0.5% to pay for an art piece. It's just a law. A lot of federal buildings, post office, anything that is a government tax dollar building is going to have an artwork near it or around it because of that law. So that's what's more common today with public art versus war memorials. You don't see war memorials very much unless you go to like the Capitol. Instrument implement Walla Walla Campanile is at Walla Walla, Washington's Community College. And it was made using that 0.5% law requirement. It has an actual function though, besides just being an interesting sculpture. So in Walla Walla, Washington, which is just a fun name to say, most of the community works in the salmon industry. There is a large river that runs through Walla Walla, Washington that people harvest the salmon in and make a lot of money off of them. If the temperature or the pH levels in that river are off, it means that the salmon are not going to be reproducing as much. So it's very important for the temperature and pH levels to be checked regularly to ensure a good harvest so that people are making income. This artwork measures the temperature and the pH levels in this river on the hour, and it plays a musical tone, hence the name Campanile. If the notes are off at all in tune, it means something's wrong and you should check it. So like I said, it has a function beyond just being interesting to look at, and it's kind of cool. It functions on like those old music boxes with the spokes that stick up, and if you turn it, it'll start playing tones. That's exactly how this works too. It's solar powered as well, so you're not wasting energy. It's very efficient for the environment, and it does a good job of upholding its function. So this is an example of a public artwork that also has a purpose and function beyond just being interesting to look at. Now, issue-oriented art is another really popular art trend these days. Issue-oriented art is what it sounds like. It's art made with popular issues or subjects in mind, such as Barbara Kruger's Untitled. Untitled is all about making a statement on what we buy as consumers. Basically saying we are what we buy. And to do this, she found an advertisement for Tylenol, took out the bottle of the Tylenol and put in "I shop, therefore I am" in its space. Barbara Kruger does another one on how women have a lot of, well, anyone has a lot of pressure these days to look a specific way due to like all of the media that we're surrounded by. Here, this one's making a statement on being pressured into buying certain things because everyone else has it and we want to be like them. So I shop, therefore I must be them because I buy the same things. I feel like this, even though it was made in the 80s, is very striking in comparison to Instagram trends today, because those influencers try and pressure you into buying things so you can look and be like them. And this is exactly what that's making a statement on. Funny enough, though, and a little ironically, she later had this silk screened onto a shopping bag so you could buy it. So a little irony in there. Another issue-oriented artist that is doing things a little bit deeper and possibly more important, I don't know, depending on your issue that you prefer. Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum. Fred Wilson does a series in which he goes to museums and galleries and basically shops their own archives to create an art show instead of making his own art. For the one series that we're going to look at in, I'm pretty sure it's Maryland. Yes, Maryland. He found a bunch of like stereotypical statues of Indians, and you kind of saw a clip. I'll show that picture again in a second. But way back, a long, long time ago when I was little, if you ever went to like tourist attractions in the deserts, or the middle of nowhere, they often had the wooden statues of Indians advertising cigars. So Fred Wilson found a bunch of those Indian statues. They are not the way Native Americans actually look. It's a very white, washed, stereotypical version of a Native American. He found all of those statues in there, and he didn't find any actual artwork done by Native Americans, just a bunch of stereotypical representations of Native Americans. So what he did then is he went and got a bunch of photographs of real Native Americans, like what they actually look like. And he has these stereotypical versions facing the realistic photographs of what they really are. So reality versus whitewashing here. So that is his issue. He goes into museums and works with their collections. He's able to do this because a lot of museums and galleries, they are owned and curated and purchased for by white people. So it's pretty easy to do issue-oriented artwork like that when that's the state of the art world today. It's not too complex to figure that out. Of course, if you're really wanting to pare it down, what is the issue he's concerned with? You can say it in like a couple words. Yes, very good. So that takes us to another popular art trend today, which is street art. I mentioned earlier, Fujita's work kind of combines street art and high art. Street art is becoming a lot more accepted today, thanks to artists like Banksy and Lee Quinones. Lee Quinones painted subway cars, which he did so illegally. He was arrested a few times. And he just did the usual tagging of your name in really large block letters, which is what graffiti artists usually do. And he ended up sparking a trend in other people doing things like that. So this is Lee's name. The Lexington Express did allow this train car to run for a few weeks, but then they eventually took it off the train and had it removed, like the painting removed and refinished. But they did let it stand for a little while. Like I said, other artists end up being inspired by this, and in most major cities around the world, and particularly in the US, we'll have a few graffiti artists that almost everyone knows. Chicago has one in particular that, like, they're anonymous. Most street artists are anonymous because it's illegal what they're doing. Even if it's enjoyed by the public, it's still illegal. Chicago has a street artist in the middle of the night will go out, and then the next morning you'll see a really large building covered in a cartoon figure. Banksy, another street artist that is anonymous, does a lot of street art that makes sarcastic commentary on present day society. We've looked at this one before. He's making a commentary on how we find our food now versus how we used to. This was done in Los Angeles. Banksy is a London artist. If you go to London, you'll find a lot of Banksys. It's illegal, even though the Londoners love Banksy. It is illegal. So if Banksy gets caught, they will be arrested. So unfortunately, even though it's really popular at the moment, and a lot of artists and collectors and galleries want to purchase street art, it is not accepted by law enforcement. So ups and downs with that one. Another example of street art is Retina and Risk's Oceans at Risk. So this artwork does work to promote the foundation Heal the Bay, which is all about cleaning up the Bay Area in California to not have so much trash there so that the dolphins and the other sea creatures can live there safely. It did so illegally, like it says. So Rutna and Risk ended up being hired to decorate the side of the building. A really, really wealthy man purchased a dilapidated building and was going to refurbish the entire thing. Instead of having a bunch of scaffolding up there for people to stare at, he hired Rutna and Risk to decorate things to make it look nicer. Unfortunately, the neighbors did not like the artwork. They decided they wanted scaffolding instead. So this artwork was only up for a very short period of time in Santa Monica. It was removed and replaced with just your plain basic scaffolding. I'd rather look at this than scaffolding because I mean, most of us in West Texas, we know how long it takes to build a building. We do. It's not a fast thing. They've been working on a gas station across from my apartment building for like half a year now. So I'd rather look at this than that. But it not only was supposed to be pleasant to look at, but you'll notice in the front there's a little QR code poster there. You would scan the QR code as you're walking by, and it would take you to a little information page on Heal the Bay, what they did, and there would also be a donation location there if you were wanting to donate as well. It also had some tips and tricks on how you yourself could help Heal the Bay just by changing your habits. This does echo a sunset with the color scheme. If you're wondering what the words are, they don't mean anything. They're just trying to make a like QR code symbol look kind of cute. It does look nice. I think it's more appealing than scaffolding. That's just me. But like I said, the neighbors complained it was only up for a few days. But you got to be a pretty rich person to pay for an artwork just for that. It's not normal. And now we're going to see what's happening in the rest of the world, starting with El Anatsui Sasa, and then we'll go to Doris Salcedo's Plagiara Muda. So El Anatsui is an African artist and does a lot of artwork representing African history and heritage. Sasa, sorry, does do that. So this is a woven tapestry for which he has not used any string or fiber at all. He has used liquor bottle caps. This entire thing is made of bottle caps. So like I said, he is concerned with history and heritage in Africa. And by Africa, I mean Black Africans, not the colonizing Africans. When the slave trade was happening in Africa and colonization was beginning, some of the main exports from Africa were textile, particularly cotton. Cotton was very easy to grow in Africa. So that is the reason why he made a tapestry. Now, the reason for the liquor bottle caps is because one of the major imports in Africa was rum. Africans were trading other Africans for alcohol and guns. So he's making a statement on the thing that exported as well as the thing that was coming in during the triangular trade. And that is how this came about. What do you guys think of this one? Huh? It's weird. It's just a tapestry. Yeah. So he had to flatten out every single one of those bottle caps and drill a hole into each one and use wire to wire all of them together. It's a long process. My hands hurt just thinking about it. Because I know how sucky it is to wire a bunch of things together. And then we'll talk about Doris Salcedo's Silent Prayer. But I'll go back to this in case you didn't finish writing that. So Salcedo is another artist that is concerned with different issues in her home country. Her home country, of course, being Central America, as well as issues that are in Mexico. I mean, it stems into that. She does a lot of artwork that has to do with gang violence in Mexico and Central America, particularly what happens to the families of the people that have been murdered, the people that they left behind. Most of her artwork is under the category of censorship because it is very graphic. I think I mentioned before that she was the artist that displayed a severed tongue. So a man wanted to leave one of the gangs and they cut off his tongue. He saved his tongue. And Salcedo heard about him and asked if she could display his tongue, and she did. Yep. So she has a severed tongue as one of her artworks. So a lot of it's really graphic. Silent Prayer is not as graphic, but it is kind of dark. But there's a little bit of hope there too. So this is a silent prayer, as in praying for those that have been killed in all of the wars and the fighting. It doesn't quite look sad or disturbing at first glance. It's just a table with a mound of dirt and grass seeds in it, and then another table on top, same dimensions. But as you read into it, you realize what these things actually represent. So this is 166 units, meaning there are 166 tables in this one room. That's a lot of tables. Each table is about 2 feet by 6 feet. And they're wooden. What else can you think of that's 2 feet by 6 feet and wooden? That might be under a mound of dirt. A coffin, yeah. So every single one of these tables is representing a coffin. A coffin for one of the people that was found in a mass grave in Mexico. So here is one coffin, the mound of dirt, and the lid of the coffin. But out of the lid of the coffin is sprouting, like I mentioned, she planted grass seeds in here. There's sprigs of grass coming out. That grass represents something completely different. What do things growing usually represent? Life, yes. So there is hope and life coming out of this sadness. The families that she spoke to, because she interviewed all of these people's families, at least the ones that could be identified, she spoke to them. And most of the families still expressed some hope that the violence would end at some point, that it would end eventually someday. So that grass represents the hope that someday those drug wars will stop. So there is sadness, but there is still a little bit of hope there. What do you guys think of this one? Like it, dislike it? Yeah.